Okay. I think, yes, I believe we are happening. So, hello, good evening, good afternoon, morning, wherever you happen to be, whatever time of the day, whatever month or year it is. I don't care. This is Liberty Hall. You can have it be any month you want it to be. I think I declared back several weeks ago that it was already February, so I could skip through the rest of the holiday season. So I'm certainly not going to begrudge any of you doing the same. Just let me know if we need to stay synced in terms of what dates we're working with. Anyway, so hello, good to see you. I am Tad. I will be here. We'll see. Because we're only reading one story. We're finishing up the Martian Chronicles tonight, which is, of course, what I have been reading. Anybody who, for some reason, is not aware and is just stumbling onto this, I'm reading the last story of the Martian Chronicles, which is called The Million Year Picnic. And so what else is going on? Well, anybody who saw last night's reading, or early this morning's reading, will know that I said that, guess what? We are trying to integrate a new dog into our household, or we are about to integrate a new dog into our household for a variety of complicated family-related reasons, where we might have otherwise waited longer. But anyway, so we started that process today. It is fraught with controversy, not so much because of anything other than the fact that Johnny, our big dog, our sole remaining dog up until today, is not entirely happy with the whole thing. Doesn't get it, doesn't know why it's going on, is not thrilled with the idea of a new animal in the house and all that. So we are going to take it very slow. The dog that we're bringing in, who we still haven't named, her name they gave her at the Humane Society was Lemon Drop, which we may keep, but it may be a little too cute for us. Anyway, she's an absolute sweetie. She is not the issue. The issue right now is Johnny and getting him used to it and getting him okay with the whole idea. So there's a great deal of dog sitting going on all over the house, when behind closed doors, room to room, everybody calling back and forth to each other. Oh, I'm bringing this one out. I'm bringing that one out. We're going outside. We're doing this. It's very complicated. It's, it's like not a quite, I don't want to say it's like a war zone, because that's not only is it ridiculous, but it's also highly disrespectful to people who actually have to go through being in a war zone. But it is, as I said, somewhat fraught with controversy. I will keep you apprised in later iterations of how things are going. I have confidence it's just going to take a matter of, it's going to be time. Johnny was the last dog to be added to the family, so he doesn't have any memories of any previous dogs being added to the family. So it's going to take a while, I think, for him to get used to the idea. So that's going on. As I mentioned in some detail last night, or again early this morning, I'm working on The Splintered Sun. Not today. I was dog sitting all day today, but I knew that's what would be going on. And so that's going well. Deb spent her entire day dog sitting too, but when she's not, she's working on her fabric art and other stuff. And we have our daughter at home with us, who is also helping and is actually in one of the dog areas, one of the rooms right now with one of the dogs, so that both dogs have companionship at this moment, since they're not ready to give each other companionship quite yet. Anyway, so trying to think if there's anything else that I need to talk about. No, we'll go into more details on all of this stuff, not only in future readings, but I'm sure in the next newsletter and stuff. It's going to be an interesting challenge, but I have confidence that it's just a matter of time. So we will see. But anyway. So what else did I want to talk about? Not really much of anything, I think. I think I'm just going to check and see who has come in, and then I am going to read the final story, and then when I'm done with it, I will probably have a few summary words, and then I'm going to go back to my dog sitting, which is pretty much what the order of the day is around here. That's kind of everything is like keep the dog safe and calm, and wait for time to work her magic. So anyway, let me just double check and see what's going on. Oh, okay, we've got various comments. I see Ray Weatherford. Hello, Ray. Claudia. Hello, hello. Good to see you. Angie is here. Hi, Angie. Medardo. Señor. Es buen de verse. De verse. De verte. Si tú prefieres. Never mind. Anyway, good to see you, Medardo. Christy, hello, good to see you. Barb Ann, good to see you too. Ivan, hello, buddy. Nice to have you with us. Tracy, hello, hello. Emily, hi. Good to see you. And Mark, a pleasure to see you again, buddy. Yeah, that's really nice. Angie, I said hello to. Isaac, checking in from Frosty Cache or Cache Valley. Again, it depends on how one wants to pronounce that, I suppose, although I'm sure the locals have their preferred pronunciation. Jeremy, hello, buddy. Good to see you. Felina, a pleasure. Nice to have you. No, Johnny, Angie says, Johnny isn't liking change. Johnny does not like change. Johnny is highly, highly conservative in a very dog-like fashion. He likes everything happening at a time when he expects it to happen, where he expects it to happen, in the way he expects it to happen. So this is a major, major thing to be going through for him. So that's one of the reasons why I think it's important that we just try to take it really slow. I made the mistake of when we were first taking them out of the car, and I gave Johnny a treat, and then I turned and gave one to the other dog, and that was a big problem. So that was my fault. We're always learning. You're always learning. So, but just the idea, I think, of seeing another dog getting a treat, even though he'd just gotten one, was a bit much for Johnny. So he got upset. Anyway, so Susan, hello, Susan Shamlin, good to see you. Yes, absolutely. We're very much rescue people. Part of it was an ethical decision. And part of it was also just the fact that our purebred dogs were all insane. But that's another story for another day. One of these days, I should either as part of a newsletter or during one of these readings, I should tell the whole story of all the dogs and cats that Deb and I have had together, and a few other pets that have been part of the household as well, including lizards and snakes. So anyway, Stacy, new face. Hello, Stacy. Stacy says hi from Canada. Hello, good to have you here with us. And Keith Dupereau, hello, hello. Another from the evil nation of Canada. Canada is one of my favorite places, as I think I've often said, for a number of reasons. Not just because they're good neighbors and all of that stuff, but I have a lot of personal connections to Canada and lived with a Canadian family in California for most of a year and got to know them very well. As I have mentioned in the past, I think they were from Saskatoon, from Saskatchewan, and lovely people. And I have ever since felt very fondly, not that I had anything against Canada before that, but that kind of secured the whole thing for me. I went, yeah, good people. Good people. I feel very comfortable. Anyway, so Kristen, I hope I just said hello to you before I zipped off into that, whatever you call it. Digression. Excuse me, digression. Which I do tend to do, as I think anybody who knows me, whether it be during a reading or in my own books or whatever the case, I do tend to digress, to swing out on tangents. I can be a bit recursive at times. I tend to actually suddenly want to pass things on. Oh, Stacy says, oh, cool. So Keith says, I live right by Saskatoon. Cool. And Stacy says, me too. I'm in Regina, Saskatchewan. So excellent. Both Saskatchewan. Actually, I can't remember what the term is for Saskatchewaners, folks from Saskatchewan. You will have to inform me, one of you, what I probably knew it, but it has skipped my brain, which is, after all, rather small and rather full at the moment, as usual. Anyway, but lovely to have two folks from Saskatchewan on with us tonight, and welcome. Good to have you. Okay, so I am, as I mentioned before, I'll mention it again right now, very briefly, which is that because of the nature of where we're at in the Martian Chronicles, namely we're down to the last story now tonight, I'll spend a few minutes after I finish with it telling you any impressions that I have garnered during the reading of the story. But other than that, I am probably just going to read the story, which is a bit longer than last night's story, and then I am going to wrap it up so I can go and help to referee the dog conflict or the dog crisis or the whatever you want to call it. So I can go and help out anyway, since the whole family is pitching in here to take care of all the animals and keep them safe and relatively happy and giving them lots of attention and affection, of course. Anyway, so do understand, I don't know when I'm going to finish. It may not be that early, actually, compared to last night, but I will have a brief sum up, and then I will be heading out, and I will tell you about my complete lack of plans for what's going to happen here next week. Anyway, so with no further ado then, I welcome everybody that I haven't had a chance to say hello to yet, and as you can see, I kind of just go by the comments, not because commenters are intrinsically more valuable to me or anything, but just because of the way that this stuff is set up for me. That's the only way I can see who's on. So if you want me to say hello, please feel free to just leave a comment, just say hi, and I will include you in my list of saying hello to people. Okay, so as I said, with no further ado, we will read. Last story from the Martian Chronicles. October 2057, the Million-Year Picnic. Somehow, the idea was brought up by Mom that perhaps the whole family would enjoy a fishing trip. But they weren't Mom's words. Timothy knew that. They were Dad's words, and Mom used them for him somehow. Dad shuffled his feet in a clutter of Martian pebbles and agreed. So immediately there was a tumult and a shouting, and very quickly the camp was tucked into capsules and containers. Mom slipped into traveling jumpers and blouse. Dad stuffed his pipe full with trembling hands, his eyes on the Martian sky, and the three boys piled, yelling, into the motorboat, none of them really keeping an eye on Mom and Dad, except Timothy. Dad pushed a stud. The water boat sent a humming sound up into the sky. The water shook back and the boat nosed ahead, and the family cried, "Hooray!" Timothy sat in the back of the boat with Dad, his small fingers atop Dad's hairy ones, watching the canal twist, leaving the crumbled place behind where they had landed in their small family rocket all the way from Earth. He remembered the night before they left Earth, the hustling and hurrying, the rocket that Dad had found somewhere, somehow, and the talk of a vacation on Mars. A long way to go for a vacation, but Timothy said nothing because of his younger brothers. They came to Mars, and now, first thing, or so they said, they were going fishing. Dad had a funny look in his eyes as the boat went up canal, a look that Timothy couldn't figure. It was made of strong light and maybe a sort of relief. It made the deep wrinkles laugh instead of worry or cry. So there went the cooling rocket around a bend, gone. "How far are we going?" Robert splashed his hand. It looked like a small crab jumping in the violet water. Dad exhaled. 1,000,000 years. "Gee," said Robert. "Look, kids." Mother pointed one soft, long arm. "There's a dead city." They looked with fervent anticipation, and the dead city lay dead for them alone, drowsing in a hot silence of summer made on Mars by a Martian weatherman. And Dad looked as if he was pleased that it was dead. It was a futile spread of pink rocks sleeping on a rise of sand, a few tumbled pillars, one lonely shrine, and then the sweep of sand again. Nothing else for miles. A white desert around the canal and a blue desert over it. Just then a bird flew up, like a stone thrown across a blue pond, hitting, falling deep and vanishing. Dad got a frightened look when he saw it. "I thought it was a rocket." Timothy looked at the deep ocean sky, trying to see Earth and the war and the ruined cities and the men killing each other since the day he was born. But he saw nothing. The war was as removed and far off as two flies battling to the death in the arch of a great high and silent cathedral, and just as senseless. William Thomas wiped his forehead and felt the touch of his son's hand on his arm, like a young tarantula, thrilled. He beamed at his son. "How goes it, Timmy?" "Fine, Dad." Timothy hadn't quite figured out what was ticking inside the vast adult mechanism beside him. The man with the immense hawk nose, sunburnt, peeling, and the hot blue eyes like agate marbles you play with after school in summer back on Earth, and the long, thick columnar legs in the loose riding breeches. "What are you looking at so hard, Dad?" "I was looking for Earthian logic, common sense, good government, peace, and responsibility." "All that up there?" "No, I didn't find it. It's not there anymore. Maybe it'll never be there again. Maybe we fooled ourselves that it was ever there." "Huh?" "See the fish?" said Dad, pointing. There rose a soprano clamor from all three boys as they rocked the boat in arching their tender necks to see. They oohed and ahed. A silver ringfish floated by them, undulating and closing like an iris instantly around food particles to assimilate them. Dad looked at it. His voice was deep and quiet. "Just like war. War swims along, sees food, contracts. A moment later, Earth is gone." "William," said Mom. "Sorry," said Dad. They sat still and felt the canal water rush, cool, swift, and glassy. The only sound was the motor hum, the glide of water, the sun expanding the air. "When do we see the Martians?" cried Michael. "Quite soon, perhaps," said Father. "Maybe tonight." "Oh, but the Martians are a dead race now," said Mom. No, they're not. I'll show you some Martians, all right," Dad said presently. Timothy scowled at that, but said nothing. Everything was odd now. Vacations and fishing and looks between people. The other boys were already engaged making shelves of their small hands and peering under them toward the 7-foot stone banks of the canal, watching for Martians. "What do they look like?" demanded Michael. "You'll know them when you see them." Dad sort of laughed, and Timothy saw a pulse beating time in his cheek. Mother was slender and soft, with a woven plait of spun gold hair over her head and a tiara, and eyes the color of the deep, cool canal water where it ran in shadow, almost purple, with flecks of amber caught in it. You could see her thoughts swimming around in her eyes, like fish, some bright, some dark, some fast, quick, some slow and easy, and sometimes, like when she looked up where Earth was, being nothing but color and nothing else. She sat in the boat's prow, one hand resting on the side lip, the other on the lap of her dark blue breeches, and a line of sunburnt, soft neck showing where her blouse opened like a white flower. She kept looking ahead to see what was there, and, not being able to see it clearly enough, she looked backward toward her husband, and through his eyes, reflected then, she saw what was ahead. And since he added part of himself to this reflection, a determined firmness, her face relaxed and she accepted it, and she turned back, knowing suddenly what to look for. Timothy looked too, but all he saw was a straight pencil line of canal going violet through a wide, shallow valley penned by low, eroded hills, and on until it fell over the sky's edge. And this canal went on and on through cities that would have rattled like beetles in a dry skull if you shook them. 100 or 200 cities dreaming hot summer daydreams and cool summer night dreams. They had come millions of miles for this outing, to fish, but there had been a gun on the rocket. This was a vacation. But why all the food, more than enough to last them years and years, left hidden back there near the rocket? Vacation. Just behind the veil of the vacation was not a soft face of laughter, but something hard and bony and perhaps terrifying. Timothy could not lift the veil, and the two other boys were busy being 10 and 8 years old, respectively. No Martians yet. Nuts. Robert put his V-shaped chin on his hands and glared at the canal. Dad had brought an atomic radio along, strapped to his wrist. It functioned on an old-fashioned principle. You held it against the bones near your ear, and it vibrated, singing or talking to you. Dad listened to it now. His face looked like one of those fallen Martian cities, caved in, sucked dry, almost dead. Then he gave it to Mom to listen. Her lips dropped open. "What?" Timothy started to question, but never finished what he wished to say. For at that moment there were two titanic, marrow-jolting explosions that grew upon themselves, followed by a half-dozen minor concussions. Jerking his head up, Dad notched the boat speed higher immediately. The boat leaped and jounced and spanked. This shook Robert out of his funk and elicited yelps of frightened but ecstatic joy from Michael, who clung to Mom's legs and watched the water pour by his nose in a wet torrent. Dad swerved the boat, cut speed, and ducked the craft into a little branch canal and under an ancient crumbling stone wharf that smelled of crab flesh. The boat rammed the wharf hard enough to throw them all forward, but no one was hurt, and Dad was already twisted to see if the ripples on the canal were enough to map their route into hiding. Water lines went across, lapped the stones, and rippled back to meet each other, settling to be dappled by the sun. It all went away. Dad listened. So did everybody. Dad's breathing echoed like fists beating against the cold, wet wharf stones. In the shadow, Mom's cat eyes just watched Father for some clue to what next. Dad relaxed and blew out a breath, laughing at himself. The rocket, of course. I'm getting jumpy. The rocket. Michael said, "What happened, Dad? What happened?" "Oh, we just blew up our rocket is all," said Timothy, trying to sound matter-of-fact. "I've heard rockets blown up before. Ours just blew." "Why did we blow up our rocket?" asked Michael. "Huh, Dad?" "It's part of the game, silly," said Timothy. "A game?" Michael and Robert loved the word. "Dad fixed it so it would blow up and no one would know where we landed or went, in case they ever came looking, see? Oh, boy, a secret." "Scared by my own rocket," admitted Dad to Mom. "I am nervous. It's silly to think there'll ever be any more rockets. Except one, perhaps, if Edwards and his wife get through with their ship." He put his tiny radio to his ear again. After 2 minutes, he dropped his hand as you would drop a rag. "It's over at last," he said to Mom. "The radio just went off the atomic beam. Every other world station's gone. They've dwindled down to a couple in the last few years. Now the air's completely silent. It'll probably remain silent." "For how long?" asked Robert. "Maybe your great-grandchildren will hear it again," said Dad. He just sat there, and the children were caught in the center of his awe and defeat and resignation and acceptance. Finally, he put the boat out into the canal again, and they continued in the direction in which they had originally started. It was getting late. Already the sun was down the sky, and a series of dead cities lay ahead of them. Dad talked very quietly and gently to his sons. Many times in the past he had been brisk, distant, removed from them, but now he patted them on the head with just a word, and they felt it. "Mike, pick a city." "What, Dad?" "Pick a city, son. Any of these cities we pass." "All right," said Michael. "How do I pick?" "Pick the one you like the most. You two, Robert and Tim, pick the city you like best." "I want a city with Martians in it," said Michael. "You'll have that," said Dad. "I promise." His lips were for the children, but his eyes were for Mom. They passed 6 cities in 20 minutes. Dad didn't say anything more about the explosions. He seemed much more interested in having fun with his sons, keeping them happy, than anything else. Michael liked the first city they passed, but this was vetoed because everyone doubted quick first judgments. The second city nobody liked. It was an Earthman settlement built of wood and already rotting into sawdust. Timothy liked the third because it was large. The fourth and fifth were too small, and the sixth brought acclaim from everyone, including Mother, who joined in the "geez, goshes," and "look at that." There were 50 or 60 huge structures still standing. Streets were dusty but paved, and you could see 1 or 2 old centrifugal fountains still pulsing wetly in the plazas. That was the only life, water leaping in the late sunlight. "This is the city," said everybody. Steering the boat to a wharf, Dad jumped out. "Here we are. This is ours. This is where we live from now on." "From now on?" Michael was incredulous. He stood up looking and then turned to blink back at where the rocket used to be. "What about the rocket? What about Minnesota?" "Here," said Dad. He touched the small radio to Michael's blonde head. "Listen." Michael listened. "Nothing," he said. "That's right. Nothing. Nothing at all anymore. No more Minneapolis. No more rockets. No more Earth." Michael considered the lethal revelation and began to sob little dry sobs. Wait a moment," said Dad the next instant. "I'm giving you a lot more in exchange, Mike." "What?" Michael held off the tears, curious but quite ready to continue in case Dad's further revelation was as disconcerting as the original. "I'm giving you this city, Mike. It's yours." "Mine?" "For you and Robert and Timothy, all 3 of you, to own for yourselves." Timothy bounded from the boat. "Look, guys, all for us. All of that." He was playing the game with Dad, playing it large and playing it well. Later, after it was all over and things had settled, he could go off by himself and cry for 10 minutes, but now it was still a game, still a family outing, and the other kids must be kept playing. Mike jumped out with Robert. They helped Mom. "Be careful of your sister," said Dad, and nobody knew what he meant until later. They hurried into the great pink stone city, whispering among themselves because dead cities have a way of making you want to whisper to watch the sun go down. "In about 5 days," said Dad quietly, "I'll go back down to where our rocket was and collect the food hidden in the ruins there and bring it here. And I'll hunt for Bert Edwards and his wife and daughters there." "Daughters?" asked Timothy. "How many?" "4. "I can see that'll cause trouble later." Mom nodded slowly. "Girls?" Michael made a face like an ancient Martian stone image. "Girls. Are they coming in a rocket too?" "Yes, if they make it. Family rockets are made for travel to the moon, not Mars. We were lucky we got through." "Where did you get the rocket?" whispered Timothy, for the other boys were running ahead. "I saved it. I saved it for 20 years, Tim. I had it hidden away, hoping I'd never have to use it. I suppose I should have given it to the government for the war, but I kept thinking about Mars. And a picnic. Right. This is between you and me. When I saw everything was finishing on Earth after I'd waited until the last moment, I packed us up. Bert Edwards had a ship hidden too, but we decided it would be safer to take off separately in case anyone tried to shoot us down." "Why'd you blow up the rocket, Dad?" "So we can't go back, ever. And so if any of those evil men ever come to Mars, they won't know we're here." "Is that why you look up all the time?" "Yes, it's silly. They won't follow us, ever. They haven't anything to follow with. I'm being too careful is all." Michael came running back. "Is this really our city, Dad?" "The whole darn planet belongs to us, kids. The whole darn planet." They stood there, king of the hill, top of the heap, ruler of all they surveyed, unimpeachable monarchs and presidents, trying to understand what it meant to own a world and how big a world really was. Night came quickly in the thin atmosphere, and Dad left them in the square by the pulsing fountain, went down to the boat, and came walking back carrying a stack of papers in his big hands. He laid the papers in a clutter in an old courtyard and set them afire. To keep warm, they crouched around the blaze and laughed, and Timothy saw the little letters leap like frightened animals when the flames touched and engulfed them. The papers crinkled like an old man's skin, and the cremation surrounded innumerable words. Government bonds, business graph 2030, religious prejudice, an essay, the science of logistics, problems of the Pan-American unity, stock report for July 3rd, 2029, the War Digest. Dad had insisted on bringing these papers for this purpose. He sat there and fed them into the fire, one by one, with satisfaction, and told his children what it all meant. "It's time I told you a few things. I don't suppose it was fair keeping so much from you. I don't know if you'll understand, but I have to talk, even if only part of it gets over to you." He dropped a leaf in the fire. "I'm burning a way of life, just like that way of life is being burned clean of earth right now. Forgive me if I talk like a politician. I am, after all, a former state governor. I was honest, and they hated me for it. Life on Earth never settled down to doing anything very good. Science ran too far ahead of us too quickly, and the people got lost in a mechanical wilderness, like children, making over pretty things, gadgets, helicopters, rockets, emphasizing the wrong items, emphasizing machines instead of how to run the machines. Wars got bigger and finally killed Earth. That's what the silent radio means. That's what we ran away from. We were lucky. There aren't any more rockets left. It's time you knew this isn't a fishing trip at all. I put off telling you. Earth is gone. Interplanetary travel won't be back for centuries, maybe never. But that way of life proved itself wrong and strangled itself with its own hands. You're young. I'll tell you this every day until it sinks in." He paused to feed more papers to the fire. "Now we're alone. We and a handful of others who'll land in a few days. Enough to start over, enough to turn away from all that back on Earth and strike out on a new line." The fire leaped up to emphasize his talking. And then all the papers were gone, except one. All the laws and beliefs of Earth were burnt into small hot ashes, which soon would be carried off in a wind. Timothy looked at the last thing that Dad tossed in the fire. It was a map of the world, and it wrinkled and distorted itself hotly and went thump and was gone like a warm black butterfly. Timothy turned away. "Now I'm going to show you the Martians," said Dad. "Come on, all of you. Here, Alice." He took her hand. Michael was crying loudly, and Dad picked him up and carried him, and they walked down through the ruins toward the canal. The canal where tomorrow or the next day their future wives would come up in a boat, small, laughing girls now, with their father and mother. The night came down around them, and there were stars, but Timothy couldn't find Earth. It had already set. That was something to think about. A night bird called among the ruins as they walked. Dad said, "Your mother and I will try to teach you. Perhaps we'll fail. I hope not. We've had a good lot to see and learn from. We planned this trip years ago, before you were born. Even if there hadn't been a war, we would have come to Mars, I think, to live and form our own standard of living. It would have been another century before Mars would have really been poisoned by the Earth civilization. Now, of course, they reached the canal. It was long and straight and cool and wet and reflective in the night. "I've always wanted to see a Martian," said Michael. "Where are they, Dad? You promised." "There they are," said Dad, and he shifted Michael on his shoulder and pointed straight down. The Martians were there. Timothy began to shiver. The Martians were there, in the canal, reflected in the water. Timothy and Michael and Robert and Mom and Dad. The Martians stared back up at them for a long, long silent time from the rippling water. And that is not just the end of the story, that is the end of the Martian Chronicles. And that went even faster than I thought it would. I thought that was a much longer story than last night's. Maybe I read... Very interesting, very pessimistic last story. Although I suppose optimistic in some ways, just in the sense that, not unlike Tolkien's Fall of Numenor. For those of you who don't know, Numenor was the sort of highest land of mortal men, and eventually they turned away from the true religion, such as it was per Tolkien, and were influenced by Sauron, among others, and began to kind of follow a very dark path that eventually led to them going after essentially the lords of the universe and demanding to be able to live forever like the elves. And in Tolkien's version of the Atlantis story, the gods, or the angelic powers, or however you want to term them, destroyed Numenor's immense fleet and destroyed the island of Numenor, cast it down into the oceans, changed the boundaries of the world. But a small group of true believers, of good people, quote unquote, made their way back to Middle Earth, and where men had originally come from, I believe. And those are the founders of the dynasty that eventually ends with King Aragorn, or Aragorn becoming king after many, many, many generations in the wilderness for his people. But anyway, so that's Tolkien's take on it. And here we have Bradbury's take on, after the multiple failures of the human race and the multiple follies that Bradbury has introduced us to just in this particular collection of stories. We see kind of all the ways in which Earthlings can go wrong and Earthlings can go right, but in the wrong way. In the case of Spender, who is the member of the third expedition, who recognized that Earthlings were not going to take good care of Mars, and that they were going to corrupt and perhaps destroy whatever legacy the Martians had left behind. But of course, instead of dealing with it in a more thought out manner, he basically decided he had to kill everybody who had been on his ship, and then kill the next couple of ships that would come from Earth. And that way he would eventually convince the people on Earth not to send any more ships to Mars, and therefore protect it from Earth. We also saw in the story about Parkhill, who was one of Spender's shipmates, that the Earthlings were basically trying to turn Earth into what they remembered, or trying to turn Mars into what they remembered of Earth. Though Parkhill is opening up a hot dog stand that he thinks is going to be the next big thing, because he's got this perfect location along an ancient crossroads. And of course, on the night that he's ready to open, he has run-ins with some Martians and panics, and then it turns out that the Martians don't even care, because they know what's about to happen. And of course, that's Earth beginning its nuclear war. And then we learn, of course, that Parkhill within a week goes back to Earth. We don't know what happens to him, but it probably isn't anything too good from what we're hearing about Earth. So interestingly enough, though, we've got this theme all through the book of humanity and, some good things about humanity, but also their phenomenal capacity. And I think in this case, Bradbury's talking mostly about Western industrialized humanity, to turn everything into a kind of gross reflection of what we understand, which is commercial capitalist culture, advertising, neon lights, all that stuff. And yet at the same time, as in many stories of this kind, we also are working with the idea that humans are not in essence beyond redemption. And just as with Tolkien's version, we see at least one small group of humans, which I think we are meant to assume that the other family does get through, and that these children are not just condemned to a slow decline and death by themselves on this other planet. But we see Bradbury insinuating or suggesting, I think, that as long as humans of good faith, and I don't mean that in the specific religious sense, but humans who want the best for humanity are around, that there's always a chance that things will continue and maybe get better. Now, it is a rather pessimistic view because it insinuates that, it implies that we are going to continuously run up against our own flaws, and our civilizations are going to fall apart, and then we're going to dig our way out and start over again. And that certainly is the best case scenario for Bradbury's new Martian colony, I guess, which this family and the other family they're hoping for are going to start together. That the best of humanity will be brought forward and will be salvaged, and that the worst of humanity will be left behind. Of course, I'm a practical sort. I'm also a bit of a history buff. What I happen to think is that humanity's flaws are not necessarily flaws in the sense that they're contextual, and that human beings have evolved a certain group of traits that have allowed us to basically become the dominant, not just species, but like the single dominant force on the planet outside of the very worst natural disasters, which are still more powerful than us. But we certainly are the first species ever to have the capacity to all by ourselves to end life on the planet, or at least to vastly set it back. We probably couldn't end it. But we could certainly, do our own version of the Great Dying, or the KP boundary extinction, or whatever. So my feeling is that, in essence, that any society that is a human society, until we actually start thinking more about which of our traits are survival-oriented but are no longer appropriate, and which are survival-oriented and are still necessary, and before we can understand that and begin perhaps sculpting a future version of humanity, and I'm not talking about eugenics, I'm not talking about preventing people from breeding, I'm talking about things more like learning how to shape societies better. But until we manage to do that, I think that humans are essentially still the same thing that we have always been, and it was our strength when it came to separating ourselves from the other apex predators. And it aided us in utilizing resources better than any other creatures on the planet. But it also is something that, as we see, we don't have an off switch. We don't have an easy way to say, okay, now we have to change our methodology. We have to do this by essentially the powers of persuasion, by persuading other humans what is in their best interest. And that is going to be a long and complicated struggle. And whether we make it, and whether we survive, or whether our civilization gets junked and a few survivors have to go out and start over again somewhere, I have no idea. And I am not arrogant enough to think that I have the answers to that. But I do think that the one science fiction idea that if you take a group of good humans and let them go and start their own society, I don't think anybody that started any societies on Earth were bad humans. I think there are always a few bad apples in every bundle, in every bushel. But our problems come from basically the same things that made us what we are, and that allowed us to be so successful. And one of those is that we ruthlessly exploit the environment. We eat everything. We utilize everything. We utilize all of the raw materials of the planet, including raw materials that have been buried for millions of years. We're still living off the Carboniferous era, and we'll continue to do so for a while still, especially with the current political way things are going. Everybody is going drill, drill, drill. So we're going to be living off the Carboniferous, the benevolence of the Carboniferous era for a while longer. But again, I don't have a thesis statement here. I'm just talking about the things that the story made me think about. And I'm not, as I said, I'm not entirely sure that I agree with Bradbury. And then again, he didn't claim that the society was going to be better. So he's just saying, for these people, that seemed like the best possible choice. And so I have to be careful. I don't want to ascribe a theme or a motif to the story that Bradbury didn't put in there. But it is a common idea that you can rescue what is good in humanity and let the rest go to hell in its own way. I'm not sure that those two bits are separable in human beings and in human society. Anyway, with that, I am going to wrap it up. I did warn you that I would be wrapping up early tonight. So I want to thank you all, as usual, for spending time with me. It is a great pleasure to be able to do this and to share it with all of you. I don't know what's going to be happening next week, since I don't know what I'm going to do next with this particular slot. So stay tuned. I am, at least for now, still on Facebook. And we'll be posting any relevant stuff about what's coming up next week. I don't expect to not be reading next week. I just have no idea of what it would be. So please check in with me on my pages, and I will keep you guys posted as to what's happening. And I will definitely still be reading, whether I read next week or not. I will still be reading in the future. But again, I have to figure out what would be good to read, and I'm always open to suggestions. Anyway, so again, thank you. Be good to yourselves. Be good to your loved ones, your family, your near and dear, but also keep an eye out for the others around you who might benefit from a little kind attention. It never hurts. And yeah, that's basically it. So be good to yourself. Be good to others. Peace. Don't blow up the planet. Bad idea, especially since we don't have any way to get to Mars quite yet. And I will talk to you all very soon.